within that blackened heart of yours to do me one last small favor, I've left a list of necromancers in the sepulchre of the temple. Dark gods know I've written the instructions simply enough for someone with your dearth to their faculties to follow, but if you do find it too overwhelming to bring me back, ask Damien for help. If you're pathetic enough, and I'm sure that will be no trouble, he will assist. If he's in one of his moods and resistant, then you know what to do. I suppose this is goodbye for now, so—" The message had cut off there. Celeste chose to believe it was simply a failing of magic that left Delphine's last, potentially affectionate words forever left up to her imagination, but it is perhaps relevant if dismal to say that this was indeed the message's true end. It had taken Celeste the entire winter to work up the courage to return. At first, she questioned whether the message was even real, fearing some enemy's ruse or even a trick by Delphine herself. Things had not ended amicably, after all, and Celeste had yet to not take the blame and subsequent retribution for each and every familial falling out. But as the days and then moons passed, there was no follow-up to betray that it was a trick. The dread in her heart thickened, so when the first thaw came, she boarded a ship and crossed the Maroon Sea for Eiren proper. There was nothing for her on their ancestral island of Clarissou anyway, just as Delphine had predicted, and in the end, the prospect of a more familiar ridicule and coldness won out. Traversing the mainland realm was not as quick as by sea. She purchased passage on merchants' carts over well-traveled roads northward, though the last leg had to be made on foot. No one, it seemed, wanted to go to Briarwyke, not even Celeste, really. Yet by the time the roads were their muddiest and the air was still chilled but didn't threaten snow, she made it back to the place she had last seen her sister alive, with the intent to be very sad about the whole thing. Only, if Delphine really were dead, there was still quite a bit of her left swirling around, and so, in place of sadness, Celeste was simply, as stated, confused. Noxscura ran through the dried-out thorns that wound themselves up and over the desecrated temple. Delphine used arcana to protect the building and convince villagers it was simply cursed, but she had never done it quite like this, never so visible and imposing. The temple was set off from the village it was meant to serve, down a winding path through the forest to the north, and so Celeste pushed back her hood in the seclusion of the wood. She circled the exterior of the fence twice, shoes sinking into the mud until her soles were soaked. There were only a few places to peek into the shadowy barrier, but no passing through it. Well, no passing through for most. Celeste touched the locket that hung from her neck. It was nearly empty and had been for some time. She never let the magic run completely dry, but hadn't come across a way to refill it in Clarissou, though it was often difficult to find something that one did not seek out. But now an abundance of noxscura pulsed and purred before her. Too much, really. She worried her lip between her teeth, finger slipping over the smooth, enchanted metal. Then, with a swallow, she flicked the tiny latch to open the locket. Arcana was drawn to the empty space without Celeste's bidding, a lucky thing because she would probably screw it up on her own. The blackened tendrils broke away from the vines, crawling over one another in the mud, and then creeping up along her legs, coiling around her waist, and filling up the arcane pocket that hung about her neck. Even colder than the early spring air, the magic bit at her skin, damp and grimy despite her cloak, and her heart thumped like the marching of some far-off battalion filled with conscripted youngsters preparing for a war they had not agreed to. It had been so long, she'd forgotten how terrifying it was to harness so much power, how dangerous her body and mind could be made, and how, well, frankly, how icky noxscura truly was. But the barrier moved quickly once so much of it had been drawn in, and when it finally cleared from the fencing and vines, she snapped the locket shut and ventured through the gates. It was a mess. A big mess. A murderous mess, in fact. And she was only gazing out over the front courtyard. There was Tempest, Delphine's favorite pet, in a heap where he'd been slain, impossible to miss even when he was mostly bone. She picked her way across the dried-out grasses carefully, like its skeletal jaws might snap at her when she ventured too close. The massive wyvern had never warmed to Celeste, but he'd never managed to take a chunk out of her either, so she'd straddled an uncomfortable reverence and